Chapter 1, May 25th, 1940, near Carvin, France. The sudden, deafening silence was worse than the fighting. Then came the guttural shouts. German rifle butts slammed against British backs as Private Horace Jim Greasley of the 2nd 5th Battalion, Leicestershire Regiment, joined the column of defeated men. Blood crusted on his temple from a glancing shrapnel wound, a dull ache that was a constant reminder of his failure. His ammunition pouches hung empty. The week-long retreat from the German blitzkrieg had ended not in the miraculous evacuation at Dunkirk. That salvation lay tantalizingly close, just miles north, but in surrender. At 21, Greasley had fired his last shot as a free man. Wehrmacht soldiers moved down the line, stripping them of watches, cigarettes, and photographs with practiced ease. One guard pocketed Greasley's identity discs, laughing. Another shoved him toward a waiting cattle truck. The doors slammed shut, plunging 60 men into absolute blackness. The air grew thick with fear. The train lurched east into captivity. 3 days in darkness. The cattle car reeked of unwashed bodies and the single corner bucket that served as a latrine. Dehydrated and exhausted, men stood because there was no room to sit down. At night, the temperature plummeted, and prisoners pressed against each other in a desperate, shivering mass for warmth. The wounded moaned, their suffering a constant low chorus in the suffocating dark. One Leicester boy, barely 18, kept whispering his mother's name until his voice gave out and he simply mouthed the word in silence. German guards unlocked and slid the doors open twice daily, shoving in portions of dry black bread and allowing a few men at a time to stumble out under armed watch to relieve themselves beside the tracks. Through the narrow opening, Greasley watched the French countryside give way to the unfamiliar architecture of German towns. Civilians stared from platforms and crossings, their faces ranging from curiosity to open contempt. Children, emboldened by their parents, sometimes threw stones at the cattle car. On the 4th morning, the train screeched to a halt at a processing camp near Trier. SS guards screamed orders in German, their voices sharp with practiced authority. Greasley understood none of it, but quickly learned the physical language of compliance. Hesitation earned a rifle butt to the kidneys. They were forced to stand for hours in formation, while emotionless clerks recorded names and service numbers, reducing them to entries on a list. A photographer documented each hollow-eyed face, capturing their humiliation for the Reich's records. The British uniforms, filthy and torn, marked them as the defeated. The Germans had conquered France in 6 weeks with terrifying speed. These prisoners were tangible trophies of that victory. After processing, another train journey. This time, the destination was finally revealed: Stalag VIIIB, Lamsdorf, in Upper Silesia, a region deep in occupied Poland near the Czech border. The name meant nothing to Greasley then. In time, he would come to know every meter of its wire, every shadow, every vulnerability. Lamsdorf emerged from the morning mist like a vision of industrial hell. Guard towers punctured the grey sky at regular intervals, their machine guns aimed inward. Parallel rows of barbed wire, 8 feet high and strung on thick wooden posts, stretched beyond sight in either direction. Between the wire fences lay a wide killing zone of raked sand, designed so that a guard could spot a single footprint. Beyond the wire, row upon row of primitive wooden barracks extended in monotonous grid patterns. Thousands of men already inhabited this sprawling city of the damned. The main gates swung open. German voices barked commands. Greasley's group shuffled forward into the camp that would eventually hold over 100,000 Allied prisoners before the war's conclusion. But in June 1940, with Britain still fighting a lonely battle and the camp still expanding, he was among the first British prisoners to arrive. The guards treated them with a particular contempt, seeing them as representatives of a stubborn nation Germany expected to invade and conquer within months. Processing at Lamsdorf was designed to strip away the last vestiges of military and personal identity. Guards confiscated everything, remaining personal items, letters, even shoelaces, which could be used for escape or suicide. Each man received a tin cup, a wooden spoon, and a single blanket as thin as paper. From there they were marched to the delousing stations. Here they stood naked in groups, while prisoners with shaved heads sprayed them with a stinging chemical powder that burned the skin. He clenched his jaw against the stinging fumes and the raw exposure. Their uniforms were taken to be fumigated. The chemical burns and the profound humiliation of nakedness under guard scrutiny marked the final transformation from soldier to prisoner. Barrack 12E became Greasley's new world. The long wooden structure held 200 men in a space designed for perhaps 80. Triple-tier bunks, hastily constructed from rough-hewn timber, lined both walls. Straw palliaces crawling with lice served as mattresses. The smell hit immediately, a pungent mix of unwashed bodies, rotting straw, and the latrine trenches just outside, overlaid with the accumulated despair of those who had come before. Men lay on bunks, staring at ceiling boards, their eyes already showing the 1,000-yard stare of the institutionalized. A British sergeant named Williams, a tough veteran captured in Norway 2 months earlier, explained the unforgiving rules of their new existence. Morning appel at 5 o'clock, standing in formation for hours regardless of weather while guards counted and recounted. Work details assigned daily, some men sent to nearby farms, others to factories, and many to stone quarries where they broke rocks for 12 hours under armed guard. Food was served twice daily, a mug of ersatz coffee and a slice of black bread in the morning, thin soup and a few potatoes at night. Red Cross parcels were a lifeline, but in the summer of 1940 they were rare. Punishment for any infraction was brutal. Solitary confinement in the Strafbaracke, the punishment block where men emerged broken after weeks in darkness. That first night, Greasley lay on his straw pallet and felt the lice moving, a constant itching violation. Around him, men coughed, deep rattling sounds that echoed in the cold air. Someone wept quietly in a nearby bunk. Through the thin walls came a cacophony of foreign sounds, arguments in Polish, a mournful song in French, angry shouts in Serbian. Lamsdorf held prisoners from a dozen conquered nations, each with their own section, their own guards, their own particular hell. The British were merely the newcomers to a camp already refined in its cruelty by a year of operation. Morning appel confirmed the grim reality. The shrill blast of whistles and shouted commands at 5 o'clock brought 2,000 men stumbling into the pre-dawn darkness, forming ranks of 5 in the vast assembly area. German guards walked the lines, barking out numbers in harsh voices. Any discrepancy in the count meant recounting. The sun rose. Men swayed on their feet from exhaustion. One prisoner collapsed. Guards simply dragged him aside and continued the count. 3 hours passed before the commandant's staff car arrived and the number was finally verified. Dismissed, the prisoners shuffled like ghosts towards the food lines. The soup was little more than water flavored with cabbage leaves and the occasional potato peel. Greasley's portion filled half his tin cup. The black bread, when it came, had the texture of sawdust mixed with flour. His body, already lean from a week of retreat, began the slow, inexorable process of starvation. Around him, he saw the results in prisoners from earlier months: skeletal frames, parchment-like skin stretched taut over bones, eyes sunken deep in their skulls. Work details were called after the morning rations. Greasley's name came up for agricultural work, a stroke of what passed for fortune. Guards marched a group of 20 men through the main gates toward farms 5 kilometers distant. The march took them through Lamsdorf town, where German civilians watched the ragged column pass with cold satisfaction. At the farm, a German foreman assigned tasks. Greasley spent 12 hours hoeing potato fields under the hot June sun. The work was brutal, but it was outside the wire, and the farm held something the camp did not: German civilian workers, including women who came from the nearby villages. The guards at the farm were older Wehrmacht soldiers, not the ideologically fervent SS. They sat smoking, largely bored, while the prisoners worked. One guard, a grey-haired Bavarian named Müller, seemed almost indifferent to his duties. He allowed prisoners to drink from the farm well and looked away when hungry men pocketed raw potatoes. These small mercies were cracks in the system, and Greasley, a born observer, noticed them all. On the third day at the farm, Greasley saw her. Rosa Rauchbach worked in the farmhouse kitchen, a Czech girl conscripted for labour by the Germans. Dark-haired, 19 years old, she carried lunch to the German foreman and glanced at the British prisoners with something that might have been sympathy or perhaps shared resentment. Their eyes met for 1 second. In that look, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, and Greasley saw something he had not seen since capture, a future beyond wire and guard towers, a purpose. The routine established itself with crushing monotony: morning appel, work detail, evening appel, starvation rations. Lice and dysentery became a way of life. Men died quietly on their bunks, their bodies removed before the morning count. Others went mad, screaming in the night, until guards dragged them to the punishment block. The camp operated with a terrifying mechanical efficiency, designed to grind men down into numbers. But Greasley, his mind now sharpened by a nascent hope, began to notice the patterns within the machine. Guard rotations changed every 6 hours. The evening shift was always undermanned. The wire patrols followed predictable routes. The gap between guard towers along the south fence measured 60 meters, far enough that a man lying flat in the killing zone at night might remain unseen for 30 precious seconds. The farm detail always took the same route, departing at 7 in the morning, returning at 7 at night. The indifferent guard, Müller, always worked the same shift, always sat in the same spot for his cigarette break. At the farm, Rosa began appearing more frequently. She would emerge from the farmhouse carrying water for the German workers, and her eyes would invariably find Greasley in the fields. No words were exchanged. It was far too dangerous with guards watching, but her presence became a silent beacon. She was Czech, trapped in German-controlled territory, as much a prisoner of circumstance as he was. The connection was unspoken, but profound. By the third week of captivity, Greasley understood the shape of his imprisonment. Lamsdorf was designed to contain men until they died or the war ended, whichever came first. Escape attempts were punishable by immediate execution. The surrounding countryside was hostile, hundreds of kilometers from any neutral border. Other prisoners spoke of escape with bitter laughter. Where would you go? The camp held them not just with wire and guns, but with the cold mathematics of impossibility. Yet Greasley found himself calculating distances. The farm sat 5 kilometers from the camp. The tree line beyond the potato fields lay a mere 200 meters from where the guards sat. Rosa worked until 8 in the evening, an hour after the prisoners were marched back. A man who slipped away at the right moment, who had reason enough and courage enough, might make it to the tree line, might make it to the farmhouse, might see Rosa for a few stolen moments before sneaking back and rejoining the morning work detail before dawn. It was insane. It was impossible. Guards shot escapees on sight, even if he made it out and back. One missed count at Appel would trigger camp-wide searches, vicious reprisals, and collective punishment for his entire barrack. Men had been executed for far less. The sensible response was to survive, to endure, to wait for liberation or a prisoner exchange, to accept the dominion of the wire. But on his 4th Sunday in Lamsdorf, during the one rest day allowed each week, Greasley lay on his bunk and tested the theory in his mind. Evening appel ended at 6. Full darkness fell by 9:30. The south fence guard rotation had a 15-minute gap during the shift change around 7:15. The wire could be climbed. He had watched repair crews do it with gloved hands. A man could disappear into the countryside, reach the farm by 8, and return before the dawn appel at 5. It would require perfection, inhuman endurance, and suicidal luck. The more he studied the impossibility, the more the dangerous logic of it solidified. Other men dreamed of escape to freedom, of reaching neutral Switzerland or Allied lines. Greasley began to dream of something stranger, something far more personal. Escape for a few hours, then voluntary return. Breaking out of a POW camp to see a girl, then breaking back in before he was missed. The German guards would never comprehend such madness. They watched for men trying to flee to freedom, not for a prisoner who would risk execution for a private rebellion. As June bled into July and his body adapted to starvation rations and brutal labor, Greasley made his decision. He would test the theory. Not yet. He needed to build strength, memorize patterns with absolute certainty, and wait for the right night when heavy clouds obscured the moon and Muller was on guard duty. But soon. The camp was designed to break his spirit with its mechanical brutality, to reduce him to a shuffling number waiting for death or an unknown liberation. Instead, it would become the place he chose to return to, night after night, because beyond that wire was something worth the risk. The guards at Stalag VIIIB would soon face a phenomenon they could not possibly understand. A prisoner who escaped not to freedom, but to love, and then came back to captivity each dawn, by choice. Chapter 2. The transfer to E715 meant survival had new parameters. The marble quarry at Silesia operated under different rules than the transit camp's chaotic brutality. Here, exploitation ran on schedule. At 0500 hours every morning, whistles pierced the pre-dawn darkness. Greasley learned within 48 hours that motionless standing during roll call meant survival. The first prisoner who shifted his weight received a rifle butt to the kidneys from Hauptfeldwebel Schneider, a barrel-chested Wehrmacht NCO who conducted counts with an accountant's precision and a sadist's temperament. 240 men stood in rows of 20 as German guards walked between them, counting and recounting against rosters. The process took 90 minutes, regardless of weather. In February 1941, standing motionless while snow accumulated on shoulders and frostbite crept into fingers became another test of endurance. One man collapsed during the third week. The guards left him in the snow for 30 minutes after dismissal as an object lesson. The quarry work detail began at 0700 hours. Greasley was assigned to the cutting crews, groups of 6 men operating primitive pneumatic drills into 40-meter marble faces. The quarry director, Herr Rauchbach, ran the operation as a business venture supplying stone for Reich projects. The prisoners were simply free labor requiring minimal maintenance. Each crew had a quota, 3 cubic meters of extracted marble per 12-hour shift. Failure meant reduced rations. The mathematics were brutal. Undernourished men expending maximum physical effort while receiving barely adequate calories created a downward spiral. Greasley watched his weight drop from 12 stone to 9 stone in the first 6 weeks. His protruding hip bones bruised against his bunk at night. The pneumatic drills vibrated through arm bones and rattled teeth. Stone dust filled lungs and turned mucus grey. By each shift's end, every prisoner coughed constantly, hacking up grit. The noise was overwhelming, drills screaming, sledgehammers striking wedges, marble blocks crashing down. Guards shouted commands, barely audible over the industrial cacophony. Communication happened through hand signals and brief exchanges during the 15-minute midday break when machinery fell silent. The guards at E715 operated on a rotation Greasley began mapping in his third week. The morning shift, though 500 to 1300 hours, consisted of Wehrmacht regulars who treated guard duty as a tedious necessity. They maintained discipline through routine violence, but showed little personal investment, except for Schneider, whose cruelty was methodical. The afternoon shift, 1300 to 2100 hours, rotated among younger replacements, some barely 18, fresh from training and eager to prove themselves. These were the dangerous ones, unpredictable and seeking to establish dominance. The night shift was a skeleton crew of 3 guards who primarily monitored perimeter fences and conducted irregular barracks checks. The camp hierarchy among prisoners emerged from survival necessity. Greasley shared Barracks 7 with 43 other British and Commonwealth POWs, and within 2 weeks he identified who would matter. Corporal Jack Evans, a Welsh miner captured at Dunkirk, understood stone better than the German foreman. He taught Greasley where to place drill bits to find natural fracture lines in the marble, nearly halving the required effort while still meeting quota. Evans worked with the calm efficiency of a man who had spent his life underground and understood that panic wasted energy. Private Tommy Wilkins, a 19-year-old from Manchester, was slowly breaking. His hands shook during roll call, and he flinched at shouted commands. During the 4th week, he dropped his drill bit twice. Schneider beat him unconscious with methodical efficiency. 3 strikes with a wooden baton, delivered with enough force to educate without causing permanent damage that would reduce work capacity. Wilkins returned to the barracks that evening and lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling. He stopped speaking. By the 6th week, he could no longer grip tools properly. The guards transferred him to hauling crews, where muscle rather than skill was required. Greasley watched this deterioration with growing numbness. Men broke. It was a fact of camp existence, like lice or hunger. The most valuable prisoner in Barracks 7 was Lieutenant Peter Hammond, a South African who had maintained his rank's authority despite German efforts to isolate officers. Captured in North Africa, Hammond had been transferred through multiple camps before arriving at E715. He possessed knowledge, camp layouts, guard behaviors, Reich bureaucracy weaknesses. He shared this information carefully, parceling it out to men he deemed stable enough to use it for survival rather than futile escape attempts that would bring collective punishment. Hammond taught Greasley a critical lesson during the 2nd month. Watch everything, remember everything. The Germans run this camp on routine because it's efficient. Every routine has gaps. He said this in the food queue, voices low. The evening meal at 1900 hours was a ladle of watery soup, 200 grams of black bread, and occasionally a small portion of margarine or a bruised potato. The camp kitchen was run by Polish civilian workers, supervised by a single Wehrmacht guard. The Poles sometimes slipped extra food to prisoners who worked with them, small acts of resistance that could mean death if discovered. Greasley began watching, not consciously planning escape, but observing, because observation gave his mind something beyond mere survival. He noticed fence patrols followed precise patterns. Guards walked the perimeter at 20-minute intervals during daylight, 30-minute intervals after dark. He noticed delivery trucks arrived every Tuesday and Friday with supplies for the administrative buildings. He saw that civilian workers, Polish forced labourers, local tradesmen, civilian contractors moved through camp with minimal escort once their papers were verified at the main gate. By the 3rd month, the grinding routine had worn mental grooves deeper than the physical deterioration. Greasley's body adapted to starvation through metabolic efficiency his mind couldn't comprehend. Muscles atrophied to essential mass. His face became gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath stretched skin. But his mind, searching for anything beyond the grey repetition of quarry work and barracks confinement, began processing information differently. The camp was no longer simply a prison. It was a system with moving parts, guard rotations, delivery schedules, civilian access points, and administrative oversights. Then came the inspection that changed everything. Once a month, Herr Rauchbach conducted quarry productivity reviews with his senior staff during midday breaks. In April 1941, Greasley stood in formation when Rauchbach arrived with his administrative assistant and his daughter. Rosa Rauchbach served as camp interpreter, translating between Polish labourers, German guards and British POWs when technical instructions required clarity. She was 23, dark-haired, and fluent in 4 languages. She moved through the quarry with the confidence of someone whose presence was above question, the director's daughter, necessary for operations and untouchable by the guard harassment that plagued Polish women workers. Greasley watched her translate Schneider's barked commands about marble quality. She spoke with clear authority, correcting Schneider's mangled Polish twice. The Hauptfeldwebel accepted the corrections with visible irritation but deference to her father's position. She caught Greasley staring. Their eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds, an eternity in a world where prisoners kept eyes downcast. She didn't look away with disgust or indifference. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared humanity in a place designed to erase it. The inspection concluded. She departed with her father. Greasley returned to his drill, but something had shifted. For 3 months he had existed in shades of grey. Grey barracks, grey quarry stone, grey uniforms, grey soup, grey sky, grey future. That brief exchange of eye contact had injected colour into a monochrome existence. Not hope exactly, but possibility. Over the following weeks, she appeared regularly for her interpreter duties. The camp employed her for technical translations and administrative communications. She was present for instructions on new safety equipment, announcements of production quotas, and during medical inspections when British POWs required diagnosis beyond what camp doctors could determine through gesture. Greasley found himself positioned where she would pass, not obviously enough to draw guard attention, but present. During a May inspection, she distributed work assignments and their eyes met again. This time she smiled, barely perceptible, gone in an instant, but real. That smile confirmed something. She saw him, not as a prisoner number, not as a faceless British POW, but as a man. Hammond noticed. "Careful," he said that evening in the barracks. "The German girl. I've seen how you look. That's how men get shot." His warning carried weight. Camp regulations were absolute. Fraternization with German civilians meant immediate execution. Not a trial, but a bullet in the camp courtyard as an example. But Greasley's mind, sharpened by observation, began calculating differently. He understood guard rotations and civilian access points. He understood that the camp, despite its brutality, operated on predictable patterns, and he now understood something else, a reason beyond survival to exploit those patterns. Rosa represented connection to the world outside the wire, proof that life existed beyond quotas and quarry dust. By June 1941, 9 months into captivity, Greasley had evolved from shocked prisoner to calculating observer. Life was still hell. Men still died from dysentery, accidents, and despair. Roll call was still 90 minutes of motionless endurance. The quarry still demanded 12 hours of labour for inadequate rations. But within this routine, Greasley now saw spaces between the bars. He saw Rosa twice weekly, sometimes more, their exchanges limited to glances, to her translating instructions, while her gaze lingered seconds longer than necessary. He began testing boundaries. During a supply delivery, he worked near the truck unloading area. Guards barely watched prisoners moving materials. He noted civilian drivers came and went with minimal checks after their initial gate clearance. He noted the fence line near the administrative buildings had blind spots during shift changes, a 3-minute gap between 2 guard patrols. The seed of an impossible idea took root. If he could get out, he could get back in. The camp's security was designed to prevent escape, not return, and if he could move beyond the wire undetected, perhaps he could see Rosa away from guards and quotas. Not escape to freedom, that was fantasy. But escape to her, and then return before morning roll call, that was a problem with potential solutions. Hammond's warning echoed constantly. This was madness. Discovery meant execution. But standing in the quarry under the June sun, drill vibrating through his skeletal arms, watching Rosa translate safety instructions while her eyes found his, with unmistakable intent, Greasley felt something he hadn't experienced since being herded onto the cattle cars, the possibility that he was still alive enough to take risks. The question was no longer whether captivity would break him. The question was whether the system designed to contain him had gaps wide enough to slip through, and whether love was a strong enough reason to try. Chapter 3. Late 1941. Marble Quarry Camp, E715, Silesia. The transfer order comes on a Tuesday morning during appel. Greasley, Horace, report to the administration barracks immediately. The words cut through the frost-heavy air like shrapnel. Private Horace Greasley's stomach drops. Around him, 200 prisoners stand rigid in formation, but he feels suddenly isolated, exposed. Transfer orders mean one thing: separation from the only light in this darkness, Rosa. The camp commandant's voice drones through the list of reassignments, standard procedure as the Wehrmacht redistributes labor across the Silesian camps, but Greasley hears nothing beyond his own name. His new assignment, Camp E711, 17 miles northeast. 17 miles might as well be 1,700. The war could last years. He might never see her again. The thought detonates something inside him. Not panic, not despair. Something harder, sharper. The same survival mechanism that kept him breathing through Dunkirk and the initial months of captivity pivots toward an entirely different objective. His hands, hanging at his sides in the mandatory attention posture, clench once then deliberately relax. His breathing steadies. The morning cold bites through his threadbare uniform, but he barely registers it. Around him, prisoners shuffle and cough, the daily ritual of counted bodies proceeding mechanically. But Greasley's mind has already left formation. He's calculating, assessing, planning something that makes no rational sense whatsoever. The administrative processing takes 3 hours. Standard German efficiency, forms in triplicate, equipment inventory, health inspection. Greasley moves through it mechanically, his mind racing. E711 is northeast, 17 miles through occupied territory, crawling with Wehrmacht patrols, SS units, and Polish civilians who might or might not report an escaped POW for extra rations. The journey would take an entire night on foot, possibly 2. The return journey the same. He'd need to break out of E711, survive the cross-country trek in darkness, somehow breach E715's perimeter, spend time with Rosa, then reverse the entire process before dawn appel at his new camp. The odds aren't just bad, they're suicidal. But staying at E711, never seeing her again, enduring the grinding months or years of captivity without that connection, that's a different kind of death, slower, more certain. Greasley has watched men die that way, watched the light go out behind their eyes weeks before their bodies finally surrendered. He won't become one of those hollow men shuffling until dysentery, pneumonia, or a rifle butt ends it. If he's going to die in this war, it won't be from giving up. The shift happens during the truck ride to E711. 20 prisoners packed into a canvas-covered transport, guards flanking them with Mauser rifles, the November landscape rolling past in shades of grey and brown. Greasley sits near the tailgate, studying everything, not with the dull acceptance of a prisoner being moved like livestock, with the focused intensity of a man conducting reconnaissance. He notes the roads, the terrain, the small villages they pass. He marks the distance between German checkpoints, observes the timing of military traffic. His training as a Leicester infantryman, buried under months of captivity, resurfaces. Rote memorization, landmark identification, tactical awareness. The prisoner beside him, a Scottish corporal named McLeish, notices the change. "You all right, Greasley? Look like you've seen a ghost." Greasley pauses. He watches a road junction pass, noting a dirt track branching east toward E7115. "Fine," he says finally. "Just thinking." McLeish grunts and returns to his own misery, but Greasley catches the brief appraising look. He'll need to be more careful. Any hint of unusual behavior draws attention, and attention in a POW camp means interrogation, solitary confinement, or worse. E711 is smaller than E715, more cramped, the barracks older and less maintained. The initial inspection reveals critical details. The perimeter fence runs closer to the tree line on the eastern side. The guard towers are spaced wider apart, creating blind spots in the searchlight coverage. The camp holds perhaps 300 prisoners, down from its designed capacity. Overcrowding would make escape harder. This thinned population offers possibilities. During the first evening roll call, Greasley positions himself to observe the guard routine. Shift change occurs at 1800 and 0600 hours. Night guards number 6, rotating positions every 2 hours. They're older Wehrmacht reserves, not sharp-eyed younger soldiers or fanatical SS. One guard, stationed on the southeast tower, moves with the stiffness of an old injury. He frequently steps inside the tower shelter during his rounds, disappearing from view for 5, sometimes 10-minute stretches. Greasley catalogues every detail: the distance from barracks to fence, 40 meters of open ground, the wire itself 3 meters high, barbed at top and bottom, but no electrical current he can detect, no telltale humming, no warning signs in German. The ground beneath shows no evidence of landmines, though testing that assumption could prove fatal. Beyond the fence, a drainage ditch runs parallel before the land slopes upward into mixed forest, cover within 30 meters of the perimeter, better than most camps. That first night, lying on his bunk in the unfamiliar barracks, Greasley doesn't sleep. He replays every observation, testing his emerging plan for flaws. The actual fence breach presents the smallest challenge. Wire cutters would be ideal but impossible to obtain. However, the posts themselves are wooden, weathered by Silesian winters, and the bottom strand of wire shows rust at several attachment points. A strong, sustained pull might detach it enough to create a crawl space. The real problems are timing and distance. He needs to escape E711 after evening appel, reach E715 by midnight, locate Rosa, return before dawn, appel at E711. That gives him perhaps 9 hours for a 34-mile round trip on foot through enemy territory in winter darkness. The mathematics are brutal. He'll need to sustain nearly 4 miles per hour cross-country in the dark without being detected. His current physical state after months of near-starvation rations makes that borderline impossible. But Rosa had been slipping him extra food for weeks. The small additions, chicken scraps, half potatoes, bread crusts, had built reserves that most prisoners lacked. He's weak, but not completely depleted. His legs still function. His mind is clear. It might be enough. The next morning, Greasley volunteers for quarry duty. The guards regard him with suspicion. Prisoners don't volunteer for the hardest labor. "You sick in the head, Tommy?" the Feldwebel asks. Greasley keeps his expression neutral. "Just want to stay busy, sir. Keeps warm." The guard shrugs and assigns him to the stone-cutting crew. The real reason has nothing to do with warmth. Quarry work means handling tools, including wire-cutting implements for clearing vegetation around the work site. If he can pocket a small cutting head, hide it properly during the strip searches, he'll have what he needs for the fence. 3 days into his time at E711, the opportunity comes. The tool foreman, a disinterested Hungarian guard, more interested in his cigarettes than inventory control, turns his back during the mid-morning break. Greasley's hand moves in a smooth motion practiced in his mind 100 times. The 6-inch wire cutter disappears into the carefully torn lining of his coat. His heart hammers, but his face shows nothing. That evening's search focuses on pockets and obvious hiding places. The coat lining remains undetected. He has his tool. Now he needs intelligence on Rosa's location within E7 WWII. The camps are separate, but the German administration overlaps. Interpreters, including Rosa, sometimes travel between facilities for interrogations or administrative duties. Greasley begins asking careful questions during evening barracks conversations. "Anyone here transferred from E715? A Welsh private named Davies responds. "I came over last month. Why?" Greasley shrugs. "Just wondering about the conditions. This place is a right shithole." Davies launches into a comparison that provides exactly what Greasley needs. The interpreter staff at E7115 work from a small office building near the main gate. They typically finish duties by 2,000 hours. Rosa would likely be in her quarters, a converted storage room attached to the administration building, after that time. The pieces align. The route is memorized, the tool acquired, Rosa's location identified, the guard patterns at E711 understood. What remains is the commitment, the final, irrevocable decision to attempt something that violates every survival instinct honed through 2 years of war and captivity. Escaping toward enemy lines makes sense. Escaping toward freedom might succeed or fail, but at least the objective is logical. This, breaking out only to break back in, risking torture and execution not for liberty, but for a few hours with a woman he's known for mere months. Greasley lies awake on his 7th night at E7111, examining this question from every angle. His military training screams that the plan is insanity. His survival instinct calculates the risks as unacceptable. But beneath both sits something deeper, something that kept him functional through Dunkirk's chaos and the long months of captivity, the refusal to surrender, not to German guards or barbed wire or hunger or cold. The refusal to let this war strip away everything that makes him human. Love might be foolish in wartime, it might be a liability, but it's also the clearest reminder that he's still alive, still capable of feeling something beyond hunger and fear and exhaustion. He thinks of Rosa's face, the way she'd looked at him during their last conversation, eyes communicating what her carefully controlled voice couldn't risk saying aloud. The small package of bread she'd slipped into his coat pocket, fingers brushing his hand for just an instant, the whispered, "Be careful," that meant far more than workplace caution. That's worth dying for. Not because it's rational, but because the alternative is becoming a ghost in a living body, and Greasley has decided he won't go that way. The decision crystallizes, not a sudden epiphany, but a gradual hardening of resolve built over days of observation and planning. He will attempt this. He will break out of E7111, cross 17 miles of hostile territory, find Rosa at E715, and return before dawn. He'll do it knowing the odds are terrible, knowing that a single mistake means death, knowing that even success only buys a few hours before he has to risk everything again, but knowing also that some things matter more than survival. Some connections are worth preserving, even when preservation seems impossible. On his 10th night at E711, after evening appel, Greasley lies on his bunk fully clothed beneath his blanket. The other prisoners settle into their usual evening routines. Conversation, card games with makeshift decks, the grinding boredom of captivity. McLeish glances his direction once, frowning, but says nothing. The barracks lights extinguish at 2200 hours. Greasley waits, breathing slowly, counting the minutes. At 2300, the guard tower rotation occurs. He hears boots crunching on gravel, voices exchanging the password. The arthritic guard takes the southeast tower. Perfect. Greasley doesn't move yet. Patience is survival. He waits through the first patrol cycle, confirming the timing matches his observations. At 2340, the guard enters his shelter for his customary break. Greasley slides from his bunk. In the darkness, he moves between the sleeping forms of other prisoners, each step placed with deliberate care. His hand finds the barracks door handle. It opens silently, well-oiled by German efficiency. The November night air hits him, cold and sharp, and suddenly electric, with possibility and danger, 40 meters to the fence. He can see the southeast tower, the searchlight beam sweeping the northern perimeter. The guard is inside, invisible. Greasley moves in a low crouch, using the barrack's shadow for cover. His heart pounds, but his hands are steady. The wire cutter presses against his ribs under his coat. 17 miles northeast. Rosa is waiting, even if she doesn't know it. The camp perimeter looms ahead. Behind him lies the safe, slow death of endless captivity. Ahead lies probable death attempting the impossible. Greasley reaches the fence and doesn't hesitate. The planning is finished. Now comes the execution. Chapter 4. Spring 1942, Silesia. The routine became a masterclass in audacity. 3 times a week, after lights out, Private Horace Greasley would slip from his bunk. Under the cover of darkness, he shimmied under a weak point in the camp's wire fence, a spot he had painstakingly loosened over weeks. For the next 5 hours, he was a ghost in enemy territory, navigating by starlight to the woods near Rosa Rauchbach's home. There, she would meet him with food, messages, and stolen moments of affection. The true genius of the plan was the return journey. Loaded with bread, sausages, or vital medical supplies from Rosa, Greasley would retrace his steps, slip back under the wire, and be sound asleep in his bunk, contraband hidden, just as the guards began their morning rounds. He repeated this incredible act over 200 times, turning his prison into a personal revolving door, all while his German captors remained completely oblivious. But this system, perfected through trial and desperation, had not emerged fully formed. The first escape required weeks of preparation and carried the absolute certainty of death if discovered. The decision crystallizes one March evening during roll call. Rosa slips him a note during the afternoon work detail at the cement factory, pressed into his palm as she passes. 4 words: "Father ill, need medicine." Greasley watches the guards, sees their patterns with new clarity. The northeast corner of Freiwaldau POW camp, where the wire meets a slight depression in the ground. Guard tower 300 meters distant. Searchlight sweep every 90 seconds, like clockwork. Gap of 12 seconds when both lights point away simultaneously. 12 seconds to get through wire and into the tree line. 12 seconds repeated 3 times weekly for the next 3 years. The method chooses itself through observation and necessity. No tunnel, no disguise, no elaborate ruse. Just wire, darkness, and timing so precise that one heartbeat's hesitation means capture. He needs one ally, only one. Jim Fletcher, a Leicester man, same battalion captured at Dunkirk. Fletcher sleeps in the next bunk, watches Greasley's face during that evening roll call, sees something shift. After lights out, Greasley whispers the situation. Not the full plan, not yet. Just this: Rosa needs medicine, her father dying. German doctors won't treat Poles. Fletcher's response comes after 30 seconds of silence. How? Greasley explains the wire, the timing, the route he's memorized from months of forced marches to the work site. Fletcher's role: simple, cover the bunk. If guards check during night, make it appear occupied. Say Greasley's in the latrine if pressed. The risk for Fletcher: complicity, interrogation, possible execution. Fletcher nods once. You'll need wire cutters. Next question: where? Greasley has no answer yet. The gathering of resources becomes an exercise in controlled terror. Greasley works the cement factory, mixing, hauling under German supervision. The foreman keeps tools locked, counts them obsessively. But the factory floor spreads across 3 buildings, a chaos of forced labourers and POWs intermingling under guard watch. Greasley studies the tool situation for 5 days, spots a pair of tin snips, smaller than proper wire cutters, but sufficient for chain-link fence already weakened. The snips live in the foreman's belt during work hours. At day's end, they return to a pegboard in the office, visible through a window. Greasley volunteers for clean-up duty. Sweeping floors after production ends. The foreman accepts one less task for guards. 3 evenings of sweeping, memorizing the office layout, the pegboard, the guard's evening routine. On the fourth evening, the foreman gets called away. Distracted by a Polish worker's injury, a genuine accident, Greasley sweeps toward the office, slips inside, heart hammering against ribs, grabs the snips, shoves them down his trousers, walks out, returns to sweeping. The foreman returns. Greasley finishes clean-up, marches back to camp. The snips bite into his leg with every step. Cold metal promise of either freedom or firing squad. Hiding the snips in camp presents new problems. Barracks searched randomly, bunks torn apart, possessions minimal and easily catalogued. Greasley chooses the latrine, wraps the snips in cloth torn from his spare shirt, ties them with bootlace. During a night latrine visit, he removes a loose board near the base of the structure, shoves the package into the gap between wall and foundation, replaces the board, returns to bunk. Fletcher watches, says nothing, knows. The close call comes 6 days later. Morning inspection, routine, except the commandant accompanies the guards. New directive from Berlin. Increased security after POW escapes at other camps. Every bunk searched, every possession examined, every floorboard tested. Greasley stands at attention, uniform threadbare, face neutral, mind screaming. They search the barracks, they search the latrines. A guard kicks the loose board. It shifts. The guard notices, bends down. Greasley's vision tunnels. This is death. The guard pulls at the board, stuck, pulls harder. It comes free. Shines a torch into the gap. Greasley can see the wrapped bundle from where he stands 15 feet away. The guard reaches in. Fletcher coughs, sudden and violent. The commandant turns. Everyone turns. Fletcher doubles over, a genuine coughing fit born from months of cement dust in damaged lungs. The guard hesitates, hand in the gap, looking back. The commandant barks an order. Continue. The guard's hand emerges. Empty. He'd reached 6 inches left of the bundle. He replaces the board, moves on. Greasley's legs tremble. He forces them still. Fletcher straightens, wipes his mouth, blood on his hand. Guards finish inspection, find nothing, leave. That evening, Greasley moves the snips under a rock outside the barracks, marked by 3 pebbles in a line. New hiding place every 2 days, never the same place twice. Physical preparation despite starvation rations. Greasley's weight has dropped from 12 stone to 9, muscle wasted, energy depleted. But the journey to Rosa's house and back covers nearly 10 miles of rough terrain in 5 hours. He begins walking the camp perimeter during exercise periods. Not running, too suspicious, just walking, building endurance. Other prisoners think he's going mad. Maybe he is. He practices crawling under his bunk, timing his silent movements in darkness. Fletcher watches these preparations without comment, understands what's coming. 3 weeks after stealing the snips, Greasley chooses his night. New moon, darkest possible conditions. Weather forecast from Rosa's last note. Clear skies, no rain to turn ground to mud. The timing aligns. Guard rotation puts the laziest sentry in Tower 3 that night. The one who sometimes nods off during the midnight shift. Greasley tells Fletcher, tonight. Fletcher grips his shoulder. Godspeed. No other words needed. Final preparations consume the day. Greasley forces himself to eat the watery soup at lunch, stomach rebelling against the rancid turnips, but body needing fuel. He drinks extra water, reviews the route in his mind. Camp wire to tree line, 12 seconds. Tree line to creek, following the bank. Creek to the road, 1 mile. Road to forest path, staying in shadows. Path to Rosa's house, 2 more miles. Same route back, reversed. Total time, 5 hours if everything perfect. Dawn breaks at 05:30. Guards begin rounds at 0500. Margin for error, 0. The day crawls. Work detail at the factory feels like torture, every minute stretched. Greasley's hands shake. He hides them in his pockets. Forces himself to appear normal. Returns to camp. Evening roll call. Counts off. Dismissed. Dinner, thin soup again. He eats mechanically, waits. Lights out at 2200 hours. Greasley lies in his bunk, fully dressed under the thin blanket, boots unlaced but on feet, precious snips tucked into his jacket. Fletcher in the next bunk, awake, breathing steady. The barracks settles, snoring begins. Greasley waits, counts minutes by heartbeat, watches the scant light through the window. 2300 hours passes, guard change outside, boots crunching gravel. The lazy sentry takes Tower 3, voices fade. 2330 hours. Greasley's throat desert dry, hands clammy, every muscle coiled. This is acceptance, probable death, certain death if caught. Rosa's face in his mind, her father dying without medicine. That decides it, always does, not heroism, not rebellion. Love, simple as breathing and just as essential. 23:45 hours. Greasley slides from his bunk. No sound, feet touch floor. Fletcher shifts, creating subtle noise to mask any sound Greasley makes. Greasley crosses the barracks in darkness, a memorized path between bunks, reaches the door, tests the handle. Not locked, never locked from inside, fire regulations even Nazis follow. Opens it 1 inch, freezes, listens, nothing. Opens it wider, slips through, closes it behind him. Outside now, night air cold against his face, stars overhead, brittle and distant. The camp stretches before him, barracks in rows, guard towers at corners, wire perimeter gleaming dully in starlight. Searchlights sweep, regular as a metronome. Greasley counts, 90 seconds between sweeps. He waits in shadow of his barracks, breathes slowly, forces heart to slow. Watches Tower 3, the guard visible in silhouette, leaning against railing. Bored, good. Searchlight from Tower 2 sweeps past. Greasley counts, 1, 2, 3. Searches from Tower 3 begins its arc. 4, 5, 6. Lights point away simultaneously. 7, 8. Greasley moves, runs low across open ground toward northeast corner. 9, 10. Drops prone at the wire. 11. Pulls out snips. 12. Searchlights swing back. Greasley presses into earth. Light passes overhead. Gone. He waits. Next cycle, 90 seconds. Examines the wire. Chain link, he'd loosened 3 strands over weeks during exercise periods. Just needs to cut the final anchors. Snips in hand. Waiting, breathing earth smell. Dirt and grass and freedom beyond. Lights sweep away again. Greasley cuts. Metal parts with soft snick. Once, twice, 3 times. The wire section comes free. He pushes it up, crawls under, jacket snags, tears. He pulls free. Through, beyond the wire now. In the depression, out of direct sight from towers. Searchlights sweep overhead. He's invisible here. For 12 seconds he waited. Now he has to move. Tree line 40 meters ahead. Greasley runs, crouched low, legs burning already. Weak from starvation, but adrenaline compensates. 20 meters. 10. A voice from Tower 3, German, casual. Talking to Tower 4. Not alarm, just conversation. Greasley dives into trees, lands hard. Shoulder impacts root, pain blooms. Ignores it, lies still, listens. No shouts, no alarm. The voice from Tower 3 continues. Some joke about Berlin. Laughter. Greasley rises, looks back at the camp. Wire cut. Escape successful. First part done. Now comes the 5-hour journey through enemy territory. 1 British POW in tattered uniform. No papers, no permission. Death sentence walking. He turns away from Freiwaldau camp. Begins moving through the forest. Starlight filters through branches. Every snap of twig sounds like gunshot. Every rustle brings fear of patrols. But he moves forward, following the route memorized. Creek ahead. He hears it before seeing it. Water running over stone. Freedom smells like pine and water and possibility. His hands still shake. Not from fear now, from commitment. The wire is cut. The journey begun. Guards behind him, oblivious. Rosa ahead, waiting. Between them, 5 hours of darkness and 10 miles of mortal danger. No turning back, not now, not ever. Chapter 5, October 1943, Marble Quarry Camp. The risks for Private Horace Greasley escalated with every clandestine journey. Once, a notoriously vicious guard dog cornered him outside the wire, but instead of barking, it licked his hand, accustomed to his scent from nightly excursions. The most legendary moment of defiance came during a high-level inspection when an open-topped car carrying SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler entered the quarry. As hundreds of POWs stood in terrified silence, Greasley, rail-thin and filled with fury, broke ranks. He tore open his shirt to reveal his skeletal frame and stared directly at Himmler, a silent, desperate accusation. The SS leader, momentarily taken aback by the sheer nerve, simply stared back before his car sped away. Greasley was not punished. His captors were too shocked, perhaps fearing attention on the appalling conditions he'd just exposed to the Holocaust's architect. But that confrontation changed everything. The SS increased their presence. New guards arrived, younger, with harder eyes, unburdened by the war weariness that made older sentries predictable. They patrolled with methodical precision, checking the wire at irregular intervals, sweeping searchlights across ground Greasley had crossed 100 times. The window for his nightly escapes narrowed each week. Rosa waited for him in a barn 3 kilometers away. Each night he failed to appear. She spent it alone in the cold, wondering if he'd been caught or if she'd ever see him again. The November frost made the ground treacherous. Greasley moved through the darkness beyond the wire, each breath a visible potential betrayal. The route, memorized over 2 years, felt different. The guards had cut back undergrowth along the fence, eliminating cover. Repositioned floodlights created overlapping fields of light, forcing him into a longer, more exposed approach. His body protested every movement. 3 years of starvation rations and backbreaking labor had stripped him of muscle and resilience. The thin prison uniform offered no protection against the cold seeping into his bones. His calloused hands bled as he gripped the wire, slipping through the gap he maintained beneath the fence. The pain barely registered. He'd learned to compartmentalize suffering, pushing his body past limits that would have broken him in 1940 when the Germans captured him. The distance to Rosa's barn stretched through open farmland. No trees, no deep ditches, just frozen fields and the distant glow of a village billeting German soldiers. He moved in short bursts, dropping flat when headlights appeared, pressing his face into the frozen soil until they passed. His heart hammered not from exertion, but from knowing each journey could be his last. The guards had executed a Russian prisoner for attempting escape the month before, forcing the camp to watch, a reminder that leniency toward British POWs could vanish. A dog barked. Greasley froze, calculating if it was a patrol or a farm animal. The barking continued, then stopped. He breathed slowly, resisting the urge to run, remaining motionless until certainty replaced fear. Minutes passed. The night fell still. He moved forward, keeping low in the faint shadows of the November moon. The barn's silhouette emerged against the horizon. Safety. Or the closest thing to it for a British prisoner breaking German military law every night for the woman he loved. Rosa met him at the door, pulling him inside and warming his frozen fingers. They spoke in whispers, a necessary habit even in this isolated barn where discovery seemed impossible but never was. Their time was measured in stolen hours, precious moments of normalcy in a world designed to destroy them. She'd brought real bread from the bakery where she worked. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing he'd need the energy for the return. While Greasley was with Rosa in the frozen barn, Unteroffizier Klaus Brenner stood in the guardhouse, studying the duty roster with growing unease. Something wasn't right. Roll calls were consistently correct, yet Brenner's instincts, honed by 3 years of guard duty across Poland and Germany, told him the numbers were too perfect. Prisoners got sick, collapsed, died. The count should fluctuate. It didn't. Brenner had mentioned his suspicions to Commandant Stryker twice and been dismissed both times. Stryker insisted the British weren't escape risks, accepting captivity with a peculiar English resignation. Why escape when German victory seemed a matter of time? But Brenner had noted other issues: a wire gap on the eastern perimeter that was never properly repaired, mud on barrack floors unexplained by quarry dust, and Greasley himself, the Himmler confronter, who always seemed too alert at morning formation. In the third week of November, Brenner made his decision. He would conduct an unscheduled middle-of-the-night head count to catch any discrepancy. He selected 2 trusted guards, men who knew leniency could earn them a transfer to the Eastern Front, and briefed them. At 0200 hours, they'd move through the barracks, counting prisoners. A missing man would be discovered in minutes. The night of November 23rd brought heavy cloud cover that reduced visibility to meters, perfect conditions to catch a complacent escapee, Brenner thought. He led his 2 guards across the compound at precisely 0200 hours, their boots crunching on frost, their breath clouding in the frigid air. The first 2 barracks yielded nothing. All prisoners were accounted for, sleeping or pretending to. But in the third barrack, Brenner's flashlight beam swept across bunks and his count came up short. He recounted, still short, 1 prisoner missing. The guards searched methodically the latrine, the storage area, every corner. Nothing. Brenner's light finally illuminated a bunk where blankets had been arranged to suggest a sleeping body. He pulled them aside, empty. The deception was crude, but had worked because no one had thought to look. Rage and professional vindication warred in Brenner's chest. He was right. A prisoner was escaping, and the others were covering for him. The guards who dismissed him would now face questions about their competence. But first, they had to find the prisoner. Brenner strode to the entrance and shouted for the watch commander. Minutes later, the camp erupted into controlled chaos. Searchlights blazed, guards assembled with rifles and dogs. A furious Stryker appeared from his quarters, demanding explanations Brenner couldn't yet provide. They discovered the gap in the eastern wire within 10 minutes. Fresh frost disturbance showed a recent passage. 3 German shepherds hit the scent immediately, straining on their leads toward the open farmland. Brenner grabbed a bicycle from the guardhouse and followed the dog teams into the darkness. The prisoner couldn't be far. Weakened, he'd be lucky to cover 3 kilometers before exhaustion stopped him. The dogs would close the distance within an hour. Brenner pedaled hard, his mind already composing the report that would validate his concerns. Behind him, camp searchlights swept to the sky, a beacon announcing a loose prisoner to the entire region. Greasley felt Rosa tense against him seconds before he heard the dogs. The sound carried across the frozen farmland with terrible clarity. The distinctive baying of German shepherds on a scent trail, multiple animals drawing closer. He'd run out of time. He had lingered 20 minutes too long, and now the stolen moments would cost everything. Rosa's eyes widened in terror. She knew what the dogs meant. If they found a British prisoner with a local girl, they would execute her for aiding him, or worse, send her to a camp for a slow death. Greasley pulled on his prison jacket, his hands shaking with adrenaline. The barn had 2 exits. Both meant exposure, but staying meant certain capture. The dogs' baying intensified. They had his trail to the barn. Fresh scent, impossible to lose. Within minutes, the handlers would arrive and surround the structure. Rosa pulled him toward stacked hay bales, desperately revealing a small space behind them. It was temporary concealment at best. Greasley shook his head. Hiding would doom them both. If found here, Rosa's involvement was undeniable. His only chance, her only chance, was to lead the pursuit away, to make it seem he'd never stopped. He kissed her once, hard and desperate, then moved to the side entrance. The dogs sounded less than a kilometer away, closing fast. He could hear vehicle engines. Guards were mobilizing. His skeletal frame trembled as he stepped into the killing cold, into a manhunt he couldn't survive. The moon broke through clouds at the worst possible moment, illuminating the landscape in cold, white light. Greasley ran, not toward the camp and into the pursuit, but parallel to it, angling for a small forest he'd noticed but never explored. His legs, weakened by malnutrition and labor, responded with agonizing slowness. Each stride felt final. His lungs burned in the frozen air, his vision narrowed, his body shutting down. The dogs reached the barn, lost his trail, and began casting for a new direction. Greasley had maybe 3 minutes before they found his scent leading to the forest. 3 minutes to cover an impossible distance on an empty body. He forced himself faster, ignoring the pain in his legs and the taste of blood from his burning lungs. Behind him, a searchlight hit the barn. German shouts. The dogs had found his scent. His death was approaching at the speed of a trained animal. The forest edge loomed ahead. 50 meters, 40. The sound of dogs erupted behind him, triumphant baying that meant they'd locked onto his fresh trail. 30 meters, 20. His legs buckled. He caught himself on frozen ground, forced his body upright by will alone, and kept moving. The tree line swallowed him into darkness as the first dog burst into the open field behind him. No time to climb, no energy to run. Greasley dropped behind a fallen log, pressing himself into the frost and dead leaves. He made himself small, his heaving chest and cloudy breath a potential betrayal. The dog hit the forest edge at a sprint, its handler struggling behind. Brenner's bicycle lamp swept the trees as he arrived, shouting orders. More guards crashed into the forest, spreading out, tightening the net around him. He couldn't quiet his breathing. His body demanded air, rest, surrender. The dog passed 3 meters from his hiding spot, pulling its handler deeper into the forest. The wind had shifted, carrying his scent away from his location. Temporary salvation earned by meteorology and luck. He couldn't move as unconsciousness threatened. Behind him, more searchers entered the forest. Ahead, the dog continued deeper, following a ghost trail, and somewhere between pursuit and collapse, between capture and impossible escape, Horace Greasley's war reached its crisis point in a frozen German forest where every breath might be his last. Chapter 6. Late 1944, Silesia. The world that had sustained Private Horace Greasley fell apart. One night he made his familiar trek to meet Rosa, but she was not there. He waited for hours in the freezing darkness, returning the next night and the next. She was gone. The meeting place remained empty. He later learned through the camp grapevine that her village had been hit in an Allied bombing raid. He never discovered if she and her family had been killed or had fled eastward with thousands of other German civilians. The why behind his incredible nightly escapes was gone. The woman who had made the wire bearable, who had given him reason to risk death 200 times, had vanished into the chaos consuming Europe. His spirit, however, was not broken. He continued to lead resistance within the camp, stealing food and sabotaging work details, maintaining the network of defiance he had built, but the heart of it had been ripped out. The escapes stopped. The wire remained uncrossed. The winter of 1944-45 descended with savage cold. As the Reich's supply lines collapsed under Allied bombing, food rations dwindled to near starvation levels. Guards became more brutal, more desperate, sensing their own doom approaching with every Soviet artillery round that sounded closer each week. Greasley survived on turnip soup and the grim determination that had carried him through 4 years of captivity. He had escaped for love. Now he would endure for spite. The Germans would not have the satisfaction of his death. January 1945 brought the sound everyone had waited for. Soviet artillery rumbling from the east like distant thunder. The guards grew frantic. Orders came down from Berlin. Evacuate all camps before the Red Army arrived. No prisoners were to fall into Soviet hands alive to testify about conditions. On January 21st, the guards roused the camp at bayonet point with 30 minutes to assemble. No food was provided, no transport. They would march west, away from the advancing Russians, into the heart of a Germany being crushed between two fronts. The death march began in pre-dawn darkness. 1,200 prisoners from Greasley's camp joined columns stretching for miles, tens of thousands of POWs and concentration camp inmates being driven through snow-covered roads by guards who shot stragglers without hesitation. Greasley marched in wooden clogs he had carved himself, wrapped in every scrap of cloth he owned. The temperature sat at -15 Celsius. Men started dying within hours. He watched prisoners collapse into the snow and receive bullets to the head rather than be left behind. The guards were following orders. Leave no witnesses. Every kilometre revealed more bodies at the roadside. British, American and Russian prisoners who had survived years of captivity only to die in ditches within sight of liberation. Greasley kept moving. His feet bled inside the clogs, his legs screaming for rest, but he kept moving. The column received no food for 3 days. Prisoners ate snow and bark. Some who tried eating leather from their boots died of intestinal blockage. Greasley used every survival trick he had learned, staying in the middle of the column where guards were less vigilant, supporting weaker men so the group moved faster, and even sleeping while walking in brief moments of unconsciousness. His body operated on pure instinct, honed by 4 years of deprivation. By February, the column had covered over 400 kilometers. Prisoners died by the hundreds, while the guards, themselves starving and freezing, became animals. One young Leicester man, too weak to continue, was shot while Greasley held him upright. The body fell from his arms into the slush. He kept walking. Stopping meant death. The march became a nightmare without end as days blurred into weeks. They passed through German towns where civilians threw stones and screamed hatred at the columns of skeletal prisoners. They slept in barns and frozen fields, where men who died during the night were discovered at dawn, frozen solid. Greasley developed dysentery, but kept marching, his body evacuating what little substance remained as he stumbled forward. His weight dropped below 90 pounds, his ribs showing through his skin like prison bars. March brought them into what remained of Germany proper. As Allied bombers filled the skies, the guards started deserting, disappearing into the countryside as the Reich's collapse became undeniable. Fewer rifles meant fewer bullets for stragglers, and more prisoners survived each day. But they were also deeper into Germany, farther from liberation, now dying from disease and starvation even as the guards' control weakened. By April, the organized march had disintegrated into scattered groups of prisoners and guards wandering through the ruins of the Third Reich. Greasley's group numbered less than 200 survivors from the original 1,200. They sheltered in abandoned buildings and scavenged from destroyed supply depots. Every day brought rumors that the Americans were close, that Hitler was dead, that the war was ending, and every day brought more death. On May 3, 1945, Greasley's group stumbled into a village in Bavaria. The guards had disappeared during the night. The prisoners, too weak to run, simply stopped walking. They collapsed in the village square, human wreckage too damaged to move farther. Greasley sat against a wall in the spring sunshine, his body finally refusing to continue. 4 months of marching had brought him to this point. Alive? Barely. With no guards and no strength to celebrate. 2 days passed. Local civilians brought thin soup, afraid of these skeletal figures, but recognizing the war was over. Greasley drank broth and slept against the wall, unable to walk. His feet had swollen grotesquely inside the wooden clogs, and his dysentery had progressed to bloody flux. His body had consumed itself to survive. He existed in a grey space between living and dying, consciousness drifting. On May 5th, the sound of engines woke him. American trucks rolled into the village, olive drab and massive with white stars on their sides. GIs jumped down. Young men with full cheeks and clean uniforms, their faces shocked into silence by what they found. Greasley watched them approach, one kneeling beside him. Jesus Christ, the American whispered. Sir, can you understand me? Greasley nodded. Speaking required too much energy. You're safe now. The war's over. We're Americans. You're safe. The words meant nothing. Safety was a concept from another life. Greasley had survived on hatred and stubbornness for so long that kindness registered as alien. The American called for medics. Hands lifted Greasley carefully, shocked by how little he weighed, and carried him to a truck on a stretcher. Other survivors were being loaded, the living evidence of what the Reich had done. The truck drove to a field hospital where medics cut away his clothing, gasping at the condition beneath. Every rib, vertebra and bone was visible. His feet were infected masses. His skin was stretched over his skeleton with almost no flesh between. The examining doctor spoke quietly to a nurse. I don't know how he's alive. They fed him carefully. Tablespoons of milk, small amounts of soft food, his stomach too damaged for normal rations. They cleaned his wounds, treated his dysentery, and gave him clean sheets and a real bed. He slept for 16 hours straight. When he woke, an intelligence officer, Captain Morrison, sat beside the bed with a notepad. Private Greasley, when you're ready, we need to ask you some questions. Greasley's voice was a whisper. What do you need to know? Everything you can remember about the camps, locations, guards' names, what happened there. Over the next hour, Greasley talked. He described the camps, the work details, the brutal guards, and the death march. Morrison's pencil scratched across page after page. When Greasley mentioned his escapes, Morrison stopped writing. You escaped how many times? 200, maybe more. Lost count. Morrison stared at him. That's not possible. I got out and came back. Every time, through the wire. Why come back? Greasley closed his eyes. There was a girl, German girl, Rosa. His voice broke. She's gone now, killed in a bombing, or maybe she just left. I don't know. Morrison wrote nothing. The story seemed impossible, the rambling of a damaged mind. He moved on, documenting it all to build cases against war criminals who would likely never be found. The interview exhausted Greasley, and he slept again. When he woke, another officer stood by the bed with a small box of his personal effects, his identification discs, a worn photo of his mother, a button from his original uniform, and 3 shillings in British coins. Greasley took the photo with shaking hands, trying to remember the man who had carried these things into battle in 1940. You'll be going home soon, the officer said. We need to get you stronger first. Home, England. The words felt foreign. Home was the wire and Rosa's face in darkness and the constant calculation of survival. England was a dream, too clean and safe to be real. Over the following weeks, Greasley gained strength. His weight increased from 88 pounds to 105. He could walk short distances. The dysentery cleared and the infections in his feet healed. Physically, he was recovering. Mentally, the war remained present. He suffered nightmares of the march. The other survivors understood. They all carried the same invisible wounds. In early June, Greasley and other recovered POWs were loaded onto a transport plane for England. During the 4-hour flight, he stared out the window, trying to comprehend that he was leaving the geography of his captivity behind. The physical distance changed nothing inside him. They landed at an RAF base in Oxfordshire to a playing band and speeches about valour. Greasley stood in formation, a clean uniform hanging loose on his frame, and felt nothing. The celebration seemed to be for different people. He had broken out of camp 200 times to meet a German girl, surviving by theft and stubbornness. There was no medal for that. After the ceremony, a corporal approached him. Private Greasley? Your family's been notified. Your mother's on her way from Leicester. His mother. He had not let himself think about her, afraid hope would weaken him. Now she was coming, and she would see this skeletal stranger and try to find her boy inside him. 3 hours later, she arrived. She was smaller than he remembered, greyer, worn by 5 years of worry. When she saw him, she stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. Then she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him carefully, as if he might break. "Horace," she whispered against his shoulder. "Oh, my boy." He stood rigid in her embrace, unable to respond. Emotions suppressed for years threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on breathing, on not collapsing into tears that might never stop. She pulled back and held his face in her hands, studying him. "What did they do to you?" "I'm all right, Mum," he said. "I'm home now." But standing there in the June sunshine, his mother's hands warm on his face, Greasley knew the truth. He was free. The wire was behind him. The Reich was ashes. But home required more than geography. It required being the person who had left, and that man had died somewhere in the snow between Silesia and Bavaria. What remained was harder, learning to live in a world without Rosa, without the wire, without the constant edge of survival. Freedom was real. The scars were deeper. The war was over. His battle with its aftermath was just beginning. Horace Greasley returned to Leicester in 1945, carrying memories he would barely speak of for 60 years. The army debriefed him at a transit camp in Dover, asking about camp conditions and guard routines. The intelligence officer took notes on forced labour and German industrial capacity. When Greasley obliquely mentioned Rosa to explain his knowledge of the town, the officer nodded and wrote nothing down. That conversation stayed classified for 30 years, but it contained nothing that would make Greasley's story known. He was one of hundreds of thousands of returning POWs, and his unauthorized escapes, driven by love, fell outside any framework for military recognition beyond a train ticket home. He went back to hairdressing, married, raised children, and drove a taxi. The war became something he didn't discuss. The photograph survived better than the story. The image of a young British POW staring defiantly at Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler during a 1941 inspection of Arbeitskommando E-711 circulated through military archives and into published histories. For decades it appeared without a name, captioned "Unknown British Prisoner" or "Unidentified POW confronts Himmler." Greasley himself didn't know the photograph existed until the 1980s, when a friend showed him a history book and asked, "That's you, isn't it, Jim?" He confirmed it was, but didn't elaborate. The image of the unflinching soldier facing the architect of the Holocaust became iconic, but the man remained anonymous to the world. Military historians valued the photo as evidence of defiance, but without a name, there was no story to investigate, just a powerful but disconnected image. Rosa Rauchbach disappeared into the chaos of post-war Europe. Greasley returned to England with no way to contact her, no knowledge of whether she'd survived. Fryoldau became part of Czechoslovakia, then fell behind the Iron Curtain. Letters sent through Red Cross channels went unanswered. He only knew her first name, Rosa, a precaution she had insisted upon. All he had was a face, a voice, and memories of nights outside the wire. The Cold War made searching impossible. He had no government resources to trace her, and his children knew nothing of their father's reported 200 unauthorized exits from a Nazi prison camp. The story stayed locked inside him, too personal and incredible to share. His wife noticed he sometimes stared east at night. She didn't ask why. The POW experience in post-war Britain carried a particular silence. The nation celebrated victory and expected veterans to resume normal lives, and the culture discouraged discussions of trauma. POWs faced a complicated homecoming, many feeling a subtle, irrational judgment about their capture. Had Greasley spoken of his escapes, it might have seemed like boasting, and his motivation, love, not duty, frivolous compared to celebrated stories of organized resistance. The Great Escape of March 1944, a collective military operation, dominated the public's imagination of POW defiance. Greasley's solitary ventures to meet a German woman didn't fit the narrative. He cut hair and drove his taxi. The nightmares came regularly, but he told no one. Fellow POWs from Arbit's Commando E7111 scattered across Britain after liberation, while a few remembered whispers about the crazy bastard who snuck out to see a girl. Post-war reunions focused on shared hardship and collective survival, not private acts of defiance. No one pressed Greasley for his story. He attended a few reunions in the 1970s, then stopped going. The men who knew fragments of what he'd done aged, forgot, or died. By 1980, the generation that might have corroborated his story was disappearing. The story resurfaced through coincidence. In 2007, author Ken Scott was researching POW experiences for a project on Stalag VIIIB. Accessing newly declassified War Office records, Scott found a summary of Greasley's 1945 debriefing. The clinical document detailed forced labor and guard corruption, but one paragraph mentioned the subject had left camp on multiple occasions without authorization to meet with a local civilian, and provided useful intelligence on German industrial activity observed during these movements. This provided a name and a claim. Scott cross-referenced registries and found Horace James Greasley alive at age 87, living in Leicestershire. Scott wrote to Greasley in January 2008. Greasley threw the first letter away. Scott sent a second letter with a photocopy of the debriefing document and the Himmler photograph. This time, Greasley called and agreed to meet. Over 6 months, Scott recorded more than 30 hours of interviews. Greasley spoke with palpable relief, recounting his relationship with Rosa and the risks he took. Though he couldn't verify the exact number of escapes, he described his routes and meetings in vivid detail. He showed Scott a map of the camp he'd drawn in 1946 and hidden in his attic. Scott spent months verifying the account, cross-referencing descriptions with camp layouts and confirming the dates of Himmler's visit. Every checkable fact aligned. The memoir, Do the Birds Still Sing in Hell, was published in August 2008. The title came from a question Greasley had asked Rosa, wondering if beauty could persist despite the war. The book made immediate waves. Greasley appeared on television and gave interviews, but the response split between admiration and skepticism. Historians questioned if 200 escapes were possible, suggesting the number might be an exaggeration of elderly memory. Greasley never wavered on the core truth. He had repeatedly left the camp to see Rosa, risking execution each time. Whether the count was 200 or 50, the essential act of defiance remained. The Himmler photograph, now attributed, lent weight to his character. He was a man who didn't back down. Verification came from an unexpected source. In 2009, a woman named Marie Schindler contacted the publisher, claiming to be Rosa's niece. Rosa Rauchbach had survived the war, married in 1947, and lived in Jesenick, formerly Freiwaldau, until her death in 2001. Before she died, Rosa told her niece about the British POW she had loved, the man who risked death to see her. She never knew what became of him. She had kept a faded photograph of a young man in British uniform. Marie sent a copy to Scott. It was unmistakably Greasley. The connection was closed. Two people, separated for 60 years by war and the Iron Curtain, had held the same memory privately until the ends of their lives. The British military's response reflected institutional discomfort. No posthumous recognition or official commendation followed. Leaving a POW camp without authorization violated military regulations, and Greasley's motivation, love not intelligence gathering, placed his actions outside traditional frameworks of valor. Yet his story found a place. At the Special Forces School in Hereford, instructors began using it as a case study in maintaining psychological resistance, the duty to maintain one's humanity. By 2010, his name appeared in lesson plans, focusing on his resilience. The Seer, Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape School at RAF St. Morgan incorporated his story differently. Instructors used Greasley's successful evasion of guard routines as a practical example of pattern analysis. They emphasized his methodology, observation, patience, and risk calculation. That his motivation was personal didn't diminish the tactical lessons. As one instructor noted, his methods showed how understanding an enemy's patterns creates opportunity, a vital lesson for survival. The story became a footnote in British military training, not celebrated, but present. Greasley's health declined through 2009. He gave his last public interview in March 2010 to a BBC documentary crew. When asked what he wanted people to understand, he said he didn't do it to be brave. He did it because Rosa was the only thing that made him feel human when everything was designed to erase humanity. The guards, the work, the hunger, it all ground men down to numbers. Rosa reminded him he was still Horace. That was worth dying for. He was gone by the time the documentary aired in November 2010. He died on July 4, 2010, at age 90. Obituaries focused on the Himmler photograph and the love story, though the Times noted the historical debate over the number of escapes, a skepticism that irritated his family. His funeral drew family, friends, and Ken Scott. No military honours were rendered. His grave in Ibstock carries a simple headstone: Horace James Greasley, 1918-2010, rifleman, Royal Leicestershire Regiment, survived hell, loved Rosa. The Stalag VIIIB Memorial in Lambinowicz, Poland, added Greasley's name to a supplemental plaque in 2012. The inscription reads, Horace Greasley, UK, 200 escapes to maintain humanity. Curators acknowledged the unverified number, but concluded the documented evidence supported the essential truth. His name stands among dozens, most unknown outside specialist histories. The story's modern relevance lies in its challenge to conventional narratives of captivity. Military doctrine traditionally frames POW resistance as organized collective action. Greasley's individual resistance, motivated by love, defies categorization. This makes it awkward for institutions, but valuable for understanding how prisoners survive. Recent studies on POW resilience from King's College London have examined how personal relationships provided crucial psychological anchors. Greasley's case is a dramatic illustration of this principle. Evidence that resistance to dehumanization can take forms military regulations never anticipated. His daughter donated his papers to the Imperial War Museum in 2011. The collection includes his 1946 sketch map, unsent letters, and a 1980 diary. These materials confirm the verifiable elements of his account, but also reveal the cost. His diary entries describe recurring nightmares about being caught or Rosa being arrested, dreams that never ceased. The papers make clear his escapes weren't romantic adventures, but calculated risks that carved permanent grooves of fear into his psyche. Historians continue to debate the details while accepting the core narrative. A 2018 article in the Journal of Military History concluded that while the count of 200 escapes was unverifiable, evidence strongly supported that Greasley left and returned to camp numerous times to maintain his relationship with Rosa. The article noted that obsessive counting missed the larger significance. A POW found a form of resistance that sustained him psychologically. Greasley never claimed to be a war hero. He claimed to be a man who loved a woman and refused to let wire and guards kill that love. On that claim, the evidence stands. Every October, CRE instructors mention his name during a lecture on maintaining psychological integrity. An instructor shows the Himmler photograph and explains that resistance isn't always about escape. Sometimes it's about refusing to become what your captors want you to be. The students see a young man in a worn uniform facing the chief of the SS without flinching. What they don't see is the same man slipping through wire to meet a woman who reminded him that love existed. Both images are resistance. Only one fits the uniform. The story now lives in the margins of POW history, neither forgotten nor central. His name appears in databases, memorials, and documentaries. Rosa's name appears beside his in memorial records in Jesenic. Two people who defied war to love each other, separated by death and distance, are connected finally in historical record. The birds still sing. They sang through the war, the silence, and the skepticism. Greasley's legacy isn't that he escaped, it's that he kept going back, enough times to prove that barbed wire can contain a body, but not a heart determined to remain human.